broadly. So West German gay activists suggested that they out themselves to the public by wearing a gay symbol, which of course raised all kind of questions about what is a gay symbol, what would it look like, how do you market essentially being gay. In 1972, a publisher in Hamburg released a pretty small but ultimately incredibly influential book written under the pseudonym Heinz Hager. It was the very first book published by a gay concentration camp survivor telling their stories, and the title of the book, The Men with the Pink Triangle, offered a solution to the gay movement's problem about visibility. And in March of 1972, a gay group in Frankfurt called Rot Schwul became the very first group in the world to use the pink triangle as a symbol of gay rights activism. Now, in West Berlin, there was a gay action group, abbreviated in German as HAAW. It was the nation's largest and most influential of the gay groups in the country, and very soon they also adopted the pink triangle. And those activists knew that this was not just a political tool, right? But the reclamation of the pink triangle also represented a transformation of a particular symbol, but also of an identity. So the original pink triangle, right, in the concentration camps labeled being gay as something that was criminal and something that should be punished. But these activists in the 1970s were reclaiming this triangle and saying that being gay is in no way shameful. They tried to rob the pink triangle from its negative power, and by saying that being gay is not an insult anymore, and in fact we're going to wear this as a badge of pride. Now, during my research, I met Peter Havenstrom, who was a founding member of the HAAW, and he explained to me that the use of the pink triangle signaled both an individual's coming out, right, because they were going to be wearing the symbol, but that it also represented a coming out of this particular chapter of Holocaust history that had been almost closeted for decades after the war. The public display of the pink triangle also signaled a break with past activism. Through arguments that were based on the right to privacy, previous generations of gay activists helped establish the metaphorical closet as a really necessary safe space for queer people to hide from retribution from the government. But beginning in the 1970s, the pink triangle sought to tear that closet door off its hinges. So in wearing the pink triangles, whether on pins or on stickers, plastering them all over benches and train stations all over the country, these gay activists asserted that citizens in a democratic society had the fundamental right to express their sexuality openly and freely. So the reclamation of the pink triangle started in West Germany, but it didn't stay there for very long. In August of 1974, the Gay Activists Alliance, so here in New York, planned a rally in support for a gay rights bill that was currently being debated in the city council. And led by activists David Thorstad and John Lauritsen, the GAA decided to design and wear these pink triangle badges. And they were like pinback buttons. This, again, this is August 1974. It was the first documented instance of the pink triangle's use as a political symbol in the United States. So originated in New York, but then spread all across the country. So gay activists used the pink triangle and the history that it represented as, on the one hand, to confront homophobia, but also to promote equality. And they did so, from New York to Miami, all the way to San Francisco, and really everywhere in between. And in America, too, gay activists understood that using the pink triangle was taking something that was inherently negative and then trying to transform it into something that was powerfully positive. Right? And Martha Shelley, who was a lesbian Jewish activist, told me in an interview that the pink triangle also had the added benefit of giving the middle finger to the Nazis. By the mid-1980s, the pink triangle had become the most widespread and widely recognizable symbol of gay rights activism, not just in North America, but all over Europe as well. And in 1986, when a group of activist artists in New York City designed this now iconic Silence Equals Death poster. It really catapulted the pink triangle into the public consciousness in a new way. Right, so this was in the context of the AIDS crisis, and this was a poster meant to motivate people to advocate for help and health care during the AIDS crisis. After the group ACT UP adopted the poster, the pink triangle really then became a symbol of AIDS activism, not just in America, but really all over the world. But the pink triangle was never just about politics. Transgender activist Nancy Mangiaroni told me that she wanted to use its symbolism as a means for building bridges. So in our interview, she talked about how in the 1990s there was a lot of homophobia in the trans community, but also transphobia in the gay and lesbian community. So she decided to design this pin, which you can see. I mean, you combines the symbolism of the pink triangle, but also the transgender symbol as a way to try to build bridges between those two communities. Intersectionality also prompted Jose Gutierrez to form the group Triangulo Rosa, which was a support group for Latino gay men and women in Washington, D.C. Jose has since become a really dear friend, and he's spoken just really passionately about what the pink triangle meant to him as a Mexican American, even though he had no direct connection to the symbol's origins in German history. He said he felt connected to it because the pink triangle had come to represent a gay community, and indeed a gay identity that transcended national borders, right? And that also allowed gay people, no matter where they were, to tap into a shared sense of gay history. So that history was also vitally important for Black and queer author Cheryl Head. She had traveled to Israel in the 1980s on a work assignment, and while she was there, she visited Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Memorial. And she said that she just still, to this day, can remember the moment that she was learning about all the different colored badges and learning that the Nazis had a specific badge for gay prisoners. She said when she returned to the United States and she saw the pink triangle again, this time on a Silence Equals Death poster, she thought that it would not have been as impactful for her if she had not already known that history. But unfortunately, that history was still unwritten and still under attack. So the archives were all in Germany, and professional historians, museums, academic journals, all kind of the tools of the historical profession refused to study or give space to the topic. And what you can see here is an article from 1996 in which a state archive in Hamburg got caught destroying case files on the Nazi gay victims to make room for what they called more archive-worthy material. So since the 1970s, a handful of grassroots scholars risked their reputation and their livelihood by researching this topic. And in those early years, there was really not much of a distinction between activists and scholars. The people who were in the archives were also the same ones who were marching in the streets. So when the historical profession shut out the LGBTQ community, queer folks set out to write their own history for themselves. And even to this day, it's still a relatively small group of historians who are writing and preserving this history. And my book would not have been possible without the folks that you see here on the screen. Now, as we're wrapping up, it was not until 2002 that by that point, unified German government officially acknowledged the men persecuted under paragraph 175 as victims of the Nazi regime. And being officially recognized as a victim also meant that they were finally eligible for compensation. Right? But no gay survivors came forward by that point in 2002. At that point, the very youngest would have been at least 80 years old. Right? And throughout their entire life, their German government had told them that they were unworthy of recognition and compensation. So to this day, the German government has not paid out a single cent of official compensation to a single gay survivor of the Nazi regime. And so now we come to the conclusion of the talk this evening. If you asked anyone in here what the symbol of the LGBTQ community was, probably no one would have said the pink triangle, right? Most folks would have said the rainbow flag. And it turns out that the history of the rainbow flag was designed in a lot of ways to be the antithesis or the direct opposite of the pink triangle. In 1978, San Francisco politician Harvey Milk went to a friend, Gilbert Baker, who was an activist but also an artist, and Milk asked Baker to design something for the upcoming Pride Parade that would be a little more happy, he said. And Baker actually said, he agreed, right now we have only the pink triangle, which comes from the Holocaust and Hitler. We need something that's uplifting, something happy. What he designed was the first rainbow flag. And clearly to this day, the rainbow has achieved a level of visibility that the pink triangle never did outside of the queer community. But I would argue that in order for it to become so widespread, it's had to be tamed, right? It has had to be made more acceptable to mainstream society. And so a lot of ways, the symbol that was born out of gay pride has been turned into a PR tool and a marketing tactic. Right? Every June, corporations turn their logos into rainbows. They make lots of money. They might show ads with same-sex couples in them. But then you're left wondering, where are those same pro-LGBT organizations when state governments begin dismantling queer rights? Because July comes around and all of the rainbows disappear. Despite the cliches in which you might read on a Hallmark card, there's not always a rainbow after the end of every storm. LGBTQ folks were among the communities that the Nazis targeted first because they knew that doing so would help them win the votes to achieve the political power that they so desperately wanted. Today, it's not a coincidence that we're seeing a resurgence of white supremacy, extreme nationalism, book banning, and the worst year on record for anti-LGBTQ legislation. Protecting so-called traditional values is, I would argue, a dog whistle, right, for preventing LGBTQ equality, is used to unify conservatives who might not agree on anything else. A similar tactic that was used in Germany in the 1920s. So in today's era of the Republicans don't say gay laws, we need the pink triangle now more than ever. If we are to truly honor the memory and the legacy of those who wore the pink triangle, whether it was those who had no choice and were forced to wear it in the concentration camps, or even those who reclaimed it and wore it as a symbol of pride, we have to commit to action. And we have to work towards turning our queer ancestors' wildest dreams into reality on a daily basis. The LGBTQ community today and always has every right to exist, and not just quietly in the closet, but visibly, right? In movies, in TV shows, in history curriculum. In every single way that we talk about the world, we have a right to exist. But we collectively also have to fight to protect that right, because the history of the pink triangle will remind us of what happens if we don't. Thank you very much. So now I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. We do have looks like we've got a microphone in the back to be able to help my old elderly ears even hear.
You mentioned the Institute of the 1920s and 30s in Berlin. That was Jewish inspired, Jewish financed. Most of them were Jews. The most famous monograph that was written under its auspices was a Jew. And the Nazis, of course, equated Jews with sexual deviance and homosexuality as part of their degeneration. The question I would like to ask, what about the DDR? How was this question treated in the East German Republic?
Oh, that's really interesting. So I will just say one quick thing to your comment. Right? The leader, the founder of that Institute for Sexual Science was a physician named Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who was gay and Jewish and socialist. So he was quite on the Nazis' radars for a wide range of options. But you're right in that the Nazis saw it as a natural connection that the leader of this institute that was leading degenerative, sex science would also be Jewish, right? The Nazis would have never used the word intersectional, but their idea, like their approaches to understanding some of their issues of race and gender and sexuality really could be seen as intersectional. And so yeah, thank you for that comment. The history of how East Germany dealt with this history is really interesting. Within a few months of essentially inheriting the Nazi version of the law, they got rid of it. Right? Because part of the communist mindset of East Germany was that they were the true anti-fascists. So it was completely in opposition to their identity as a communist nation to have a law that the Nazis had even tampered with. So within a few months, they got rid of the law. Now, of course, that does not mean that they were pro-gay rights by any means. They continued to use the original version of paragraph 175. They underwent kind of a legal overhaul. I believe it was in 1951. And they actually implemented a new law that applied both to queer men and queer women. And so that's a big difference between West and East Germany. But ultimately, the East German government essentially viewed homosexuality as a victimless crime. And after about the 1956 or 1957, completely stopped enforcing its anti-gay laws. And completely repealed, I think it turned into, their paragraph 175 turned into, I think, like paragraph 215, don't quote me on that one, but then they actually fully repealed it well before West Germany ever did. So if you're interested in learning more about the East German context, there's a brand new book out called States of Liberation by a historian named Sam Huneke, who it's an incredible deep dive into how East Germany looked at this history.
Any students, questions? Anything, I mean, it doesn't have to be like...
Or a comment.
Yeah, a comment, or something that struck you that you want to know more about.
Yes.
Wait.
Here comes the mic.
But my question kind of falls in line more with, so I used to be a cinema major, I did that's in Newsome. And in those kinds of classes we would talk about, like, with German films, like pre-war, we would discuss about Hollywood actors or other people that would kind of almost like lavender themselves in like the military or other things. And so is there any, like, within your research, have you done any research around like protected gay men or queer individuals?
So that is a very interesting question, and especially it depends on the time, what time you're looking at, because clearly after Germany loses World War I, the emperor abdicates the throne and a democracy is installed, right, the Weimar Republic. And so Berlin really becomes like a gay capital of the world, where people are coming from New York and Paris and London. And then there's a pretty vibrant gay scene, which includes gay publications and also some of like the first kind of gay cinema. Of course, when the Nazis come to power just a few years later, they crush that. Right? And they actually blame democracy for making people more gay. Because in a democracy you have more civil liberties and therefore like more freedom to be seduced into these other lifestyles, I guess. Now this idea of protected queer people is really interesting. One example that comes to mind is a guy named Ernst Röhm, who was a very, very high-ranking Nazi official. He was the head of the stormtroopers, or the SA, which, I mean, that makes him probably the top 5 most powerful people in the Nazi regime. He was a Nazi even before Hitler became a Nazi, so like he was one of kind of the original. He also made no secret of the fact that he was gay. And in fact, I was listening to a scholar talk the other day that he argued that Ernstrom was the world's first openly gay politician, which is kind of a interesting take on it. But Hitler himself protected Rome. I put the quote up from Heinrich Himmler, who was very personally obsessed with rooting out homosexuality, and he kept trying to tell Hitler, like, we can't have an openly gay person in our organization. To which Hitler then said, well, you know what, he issued a directive to all Nazi leadership saying the sexual lives of Nazi leaders is not to be discussed, right? So kind of shielding Rome, because Rome was an asset to the Nazi party. But then the left-wing parties, which we today kind of consider, right, allies of LGBT rights, but in Germany, the Social Democrats and the Communists used Rome as a smear campaign. They found some of his letters and they published them in the newspaper and said, oh, the Nazis are promising to clean up Germany. How are they going to do so when they let a gay man, as such a high-ranking position? So it's only after that point that Rome becomes a liability to the party that Hitler has him murdered in June of 1934. But I would say that, yeah, is one example of a very prominent gay man who was protected up to a certain point. And in fact, a lot of the testimony that we have of gay men who were victimized later, writing and saying, in 1931 or 1932, well, it can't get too bad for us because Rome is in power. It's like even they were seeing Rome as maybe shielding themselves from persecution, which clearly was just not the case.
Was Hitler gay?
No. Very definitively, Hitler was not gay.
And why is there such controversy about that, though? Some people discuss it all the time.
Oh, people discuss it all the time. And there's all these theories about his sexuality and his anatomy, and and I think that stems from actually quite homophobic ideology of some type of link between sexual deviance and criminality, right? So there's this idea that he is not only kind of mentally and morally perverted and evil, but that also then must have either roots in or expressions in sexuality. And there's a, unfortunately, very popular book. I kind of hesitate to call it a book. It's some type of sham that it's like hiding as research, called the Pink Swastika. And unfortunately, because it has a really catchy name, it's also really high on a lot of Amazon and Google book searches. But this guy has argued that not only Hitler, but all of the leading Nazis were gay. And they actually just only hated effeminate gay men. And so they only murdered effeminate gay men. And in fact, that it was some type of deep-seated homophobia that prompted them to lash out and kill all of these people, and that somehow the Jews just were caught up in it. But the primary targets were gay men. But all of that has been debunked. It's not based in historical, in history, period.
He did lack one testicle.
There's all kind of theories about that, yes.
So that's, when he committed suicide, he was identified from his dental work. And I think the evidence for the one testicle, or the failure of the testicle to descend, is reliable. Whatever the hell it might signify.
What it might mean, I think that's the question, right?
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Anything at all.
Okay, let's see. Is there any other students that would like to ask something, make a comment? No? I have a question for you. So I'm not a historian. I'm religious
Never
studies.
forgive you for that.
And I'm a proud religious studies Holocaust scholar. There aren't a lot of us, but those that are around are pretty good. But the one thing I wanted to ask you was a religious studies question. So how does the research today on homosexuality and being Jewish during World War II sit with Jewish religious communities that do not accept homosexuality, LGBTQ, transgender?
I think that in my research, I've met some of, and not that I don't mean met personally, through the historical records, met whether it was organizations or individuals, Jewish organizations or individuals who were both the most ardent supporters of the reclamation of the Pink Triangle, for example, and having an inclusive understanding of this time period, to the opposite end of the spectrum of Jewish organizations really leading the calls to keep the memory of queer victims out of kind of Holocaust studies and Holocaust education. I would say that's also the same for Christian organizations and institutions. One of the things that I don't know why I found it shocking, but it did shock me, is that one of the most ardent supporters of what I call Pink Triangle memories and memorialization was a non-denominational evangelical church in Germany that was essentially coalition building with Jewish organizations. So for example, in 1985, a group of gay organizations submitted an application to have a Pink Triangle monument to the prisoners at Dachau concentration camp memorial site. And it is just out of hand denied. And it keeps being denied and keeps being denied. And on the camp grounds there at Dachau is what's known, I think I'm going to translate it right, but the Church of Reconciliation. And apparently in their charter, they don't have to listen to the governing council of the Dachau Memorial. So they actually took the Pink Triangle and kept it there in their courtyard for 10 years until the Dachau committee changed their mind. And so this is, they were a big ally to the gay community and memorialization efforts that I think helped them gain legitimacy in the eyes of kind of the straight mainstream society in Germany.
Any questions at all? No? Let's give a big hand to our If you like a personally autographed book, Chris is there to sell your books in the back. Thank you so much. And keep in touch with HGI, HGIManhattan.com.